fog clung to the damp earth, a thick, grey blanket that smothered the rolling fields near Aricourt, France. Inside the steel hull of his Sherman, First Lieutenant Merwin, Munn of the 37th Tank Battalion, gripped the cold, hard rim of the turret, his knuckles white. The metallic taste of adrenaline was familiar, but this morning it was sharper, laced with a specific, cold dread. Through the periscope, his gunner scanned the mist, shrouded terrain, a world reduced to shades of grey and green. They had been warned about the Panthers. The name itself was whispered with a mix of respect and fear. The German medium tank, with its long, overhanging gun and elegantly sloped armour, was a predator on this battlefield. Its frontal glacis plate, angled so perfectly, had proven nearly impervious to the standard American shells their 7mm gun fired. It was a brutal equation they all knew. A Panther could kill a Sherman from over 2,000 yards, while the Sherman's shot would simply ricochet. Off the Panther's front, a gleaming insult before the return fire came, a hammer of steel and high explosive that too often turned their own tank into a funeral pyre. What Munn and his crew didn't know, what they couldn't truly appreciate in that tense, foggy moment, was that tucked into their ammunition rack, nestled between the more numerous high, explosive and standard armour, piercing rounds, were 6 shells that would rewrite the tactical calculus of their war. 6 M93 high-velocity armour, piercing rounds. Each one contained a core of tungsten carbide, a material harder than anything their German counterparts typically faced. This core, cradled in a lightweight aluminum body, was about to transform their medium Sherman into what German tankers would come to fear as an unexpected, lethal threat. The psychological impact of this ammunition would prove as devastating as its penetrating power, shattering German assumptions about American tank capabilities and forcing a complete, demoralizing reassessment of the Panthers' presumed invulnerability. The story of how this specialized ammunition altered the balance of armored warfare begins not on these battlefields of France, but in the sterile, frantic environments of American testing grounds and industrial facilities. It was there, in early 1944, that metallurgists and ballistic engineers worked against the clock to solve a problem that military planners had failed to anticipate. A problem that now threatened to undermine the entire Allied armoured thrust into Europe. The United States Army faced a dire tactical dilemma. The M4 Sherman tank, the reliable, numerous backbone of American armoured divisions, was encountering German tanks it could not reliably defeat in a head-on fight. The Panther, Germany's sophisticated answer to the Soviet T-34, combined a powerful, high-velocity 70mm gun with an 18mm glacis plate sloped at 55 degrees. This geometry created an effective thickness of approximately 140 millimeters of steel, a shield that standard American 75mm shot simply could not breach. American intelligence, based on flawed and optimistic assessments, had drastically underestimated both the quantity and the quality of the Panthers that would be deployed in Normandy. By June 1944, when Allied forces stormed ashore, a staggering 38% of German tanks in the theatre were Panthers. Not the handful predicted, but hundreds of these advanced machines, often crewed by inexperienced soldiers, but protected by armour that made them mobile fortresses against the Sherman's main gun, the 75mm M3 gun, which armed the vast majority of Shermans landing in Normandy, could not penetrate a Panther's frontal armour at any realistic combat range. The round would strike the sloped plate and scream away into the distance, leaving the Sherman crew horrifically vulnerable to the Panther's reply, which could destroy them from distances they couldn't even effectively see. Even the improved 7.6mm M1 gun, which began reaching units in small numbers in July 1944, struggled terribly against the Panther's robust protection. Using the standard M62 armour, piercing capped round, the 76mm could penetrate about 109mm of vertical armour at 1,000 yards. This was sufficient against the Panzer IV and many German assault guns. But the Panther's cleverly sloped frontal armour remained effectively immune in a frontal engagement. The 76mm could, theoretically, penetrate the Panther's curved gun mantlet, but only at point-blank range, typically under 100 yards. A suicidal distance where the Panther's own advantages in firepower and armour were overwhelming. The problem, the engineers realised, was not primarily the gun itself, but the physics of the ammunition it fired. The deployment of the 76mm gun itself had been a saga of bureaucratic hesitation and belated recognition of a grim reality. The first M4 Shermans mounting the 76mm M1 gun had rolled off production lines back in January 1944. These M4A176 these Shermans arrived in Britain on April 10, 1944, with 130 tanks delivered and ready for the impending invasion. Yet, despite their availability, American commanders refused to deploy these improved tanks on D-Day. The reasons were a mixture of practical concern and profound miscalculation. Crews lacked adequate training time on the new weapon system. Logisticians worried about the nightmare of maintaining two different ammunition types in the chaotic supply chains of an invasion. Most critically, and most disastrously, senior commanders believed the 75mm gun, adequate for infantry support and the older German Mark IVs, would prove sufficient for the expected opposition. This belief proved to be a catastrophic error. By early July 1944, field reports from Normandy painted a picture of desperation and loss. On July 2nd, complaints about the 75mm gun's utter ineffectiveness against German armour reached the Supreme Commander himself, General Dwight Eisenhower. His response, documented in multiple historical accounts, captured the command-level frustration and anger. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out? Why? I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war." The full quote, as recorded by witnesses, continued with stronger language, expressing his fury that the Ordnance Department had assured him the 76 WWII would take care of anything the Germans had. A board was hastily convened on July 12, 1944, and it determined officially what tank crews already knew from bitter, bloody experience. Standard American tank weapons could not defeat Panthers from the front. General Omar Bradley, upon receiving this confirmation, immediately ordered all available 76mm Shermans rushed from Britain to the front lines. On July 25, 1944, during the breakout operation codenamed Cobra, 102 M4A1's 76 tanks made their combat debut. The initial engagement reports were sobering. While the 76mm represented a measurable improvement over the 75mm, it still struggled significantly against the Panther's frontal armour at typical combat ranges. Sherman crews quickly learned they needed to manoeuvre for dangerous flank shots or target the Panther's small, sturdy gun mantlet at suicidally close range. Neither option was tactically desirable when facing a tank that could destroy them from nearly a mile away. The solution, it turned out, lay not in a bigger gun, but in better ammunition, a breakthrough in metallurgy and physics. By July 1944, American ordnance engineers had developed and perfected the T4 round, later standardized as the M93 HVAP, high-velocity armor, piercing. This ammunition represented a fundamental departure from conventional armor, piercing design. The projectile was a marvel of engineering, a slender, dense core of tungsten carbide, one of the hardest materials available, surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body, and capped with a ballistic windshield. This, arrow within an arrow, design concentrated the projectile's kinetic energy into a smaller, denser penetrator while reducing the overall weight of the shell, allowing it to be fired at a much higher velocity. The results were dramatic. The M93 round achieved a muzzle velocity of 1,036 meters per second, compared to 792 meters per second for the standard M62 round. This 244-meter per second velocity increase translated directly into a massive boost in penetrating power. At 1,000 yards, the HVAP round could punch through 160 millimeters of vertical armor. Against the Panther's gun mantlet, 100 aluminium of curved cast steel on early OSF. DNA models later increased to 120 mm on the OSF. G. This meant reliable penetration at ranges up to 1,000 meters instead of point-blank distance. The mantlet, once a near impossible target, suddenly became a viable aiming point for Sherman crews, who had previously been forced to attempt desperate, vulnerable flanking maneuvers or simply retreat. But the brilliant development of HVAP represented only half the solution. Mass production was another matter entirely, a problem rooted in global logistics and strategic resources. The T4 round depended entirely on tungsten carbide, a strategic material imported primarily from China, which had produced 36% of the global tungsten supply before the war. Tungsten was critical to numerous war industries' machine tools, armor-piercing ammunition for multiple calibers, armor plate hardening, and various industrial processes all competed for the limited supplies. American tungsten demand for HVAP ammunition alone consumed hundreds of metric tons annually. Each 76mm HVAP round contained approximately 0.88 kilograms of tungsten carbide, meaning a single Sherman carrying 6 rounds required nearly 5.5 kilograms of this scarce material. China produced approximately 10,000 metric tons of tungsten concentrates in 1944, but this had to serve all Allied needs across all applications. The United States supplemented Chinese imports with domestic production from limited deposits in Colorado, Nevada, and California, but total availability remained critically constrained. Germany's tungsten position was far worse, with Swedish imports declining sharply as the war turned against the Reich and domestic production remaining minimal. By 1945, German factories desperately hoarded ton for the machine tools needed for aircraft engine production, while Panther crews received only standard ammunition. The United States Ordnance Department had been testing HVAP projectiles since the spring of 1942, but production at a meaningful scale did not begin until after the Normandy landings revealed the devastating extent of the Panther problem. The ramp-up was agonizingly slow. In July 1944, production of 3-inch HVAP rounds for tank destroyers reached a mere 1,000 rounds. August saw only 1,000 rounds of the 76mm HVAP produced. September yielded another 1,000. It was not until November 1944 that monthly production finally reached 5,000 rounds for the 76mm, ramping up to 7,000 rounds per month by January 1945. By March 1945, approximately 33,000 rounds of 76mm ammunition had been produced, a significant industrial effort, but still a tiny fraction of the overall ammunition supply. This scarcity dictated a brutal reality at the front. By February 1945, the average 76mm Sherman in Europe had received a total of just 5 HVAP rounds. 5 precious rounds to face an enemy that was deploying Panthers as the standard tank in its Panzer divisions. A Sherman company with 17 tanks would possess only 85 HVAP rounds in total, while facing German units that might field 30 or more Panthers in a single engagement. The first HVAP rounds reached the European theatre in August 1944, but their arrival was initially overshadowed by the broader, more immediate tactical problems of the Normandy bocage. The dense hedgerows forced American armor into brutal, close quarters combat where the superior German guns could ambush Sherman columns with devastating effect. German tank commanders had learned to position their Panthers in hull-down positions, exposing only the heavily armored turret while keeping the more vulnerable hull hidden. German doctrine emphasized first shot capability, with Panthers waiting in prepared positions, allowing Sherman columns to approach before opening fire from ranges where American return fire was largely ineffective. The psychological impact on American tank crews was severe and corrosive. Crews nicknamed the Sherman the Ronson lighter, a grim joke claiming it lit on fire first time, every time. While post-war analysis would show this reputation was exaggerated, the perception itself shaped behavior. Tank commanders who spotted Panthers often chose to disengage, call for artillery or air support, rather than engage directly, ceding tactical initiative to an enemy who could be defeated, but only with the right tools and tactics. The arrival of HVAP rounds began to slowly change this calculus, but its impact was hampered by the extreme scarcity of the ammunition and a widespread lack of training on its specific capabilities and limitations. The first widespread, true combat test of HVAP ammunition came not in Normandy's suffocating hedgerows, but in the more open country of Lorraine, where American armored divisions had finally broken out into terrain that, ironically, still favored German defensive tactics. September 1944 found Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army deep in France, racing headlong toward the German border with its logistics stretched to the breaking point. The 4th Armored Division, one of the most effective and aggressive American armored formations, had advanced so rapidly it had seized a bridgehead over the Moselle River near the town of Aracourt. The German High Command recognized the existential threat. If Patton's armor broke through here and reached the Rhine, crossing into Germany proper, the industrial heart of the Reich would be laid bare. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army received urgent orders to counterattack, destroy the American bridgehead, and throw Patton's advance back in disarray. The German force assembled for this attack included 2 newly formed panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th. Equipped primarily with brand, new Panther tanks fresh from German factories, manned by young, enthusiastic, but woefully inexperienced crews. On paper, the German advantage appeared overwhelming. The 2 brigades together fielded approximately 150 tanks against combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, which possessed roughly 50 Sherman tanks. The 113th Panzer Brigade alone entered battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns, including 42 Panthers and 40 Panzer IVs. German planners, confident in their technical superiority, anticipated a rapid, decisive victory. The Panthers' formidable armor and firepower, they believed, would easily compensate for any American advantages in logistics or air support. It was a fundamental, and ultimately fatal, miscalculation. The Battle of Aracourt, fought over 11 days from September 18th to 29th, would become the largest tank engagement fought by American forces until the Battle of the Bulge. More importantly, it would demonstrate conclusively that American tank crews, properly trained, led, and equipped, could defeat technically superior German armor through superior tactics, seamless combined arms coordination, and the judicious use of a few rounds of high-velocity armor, piercing ammunition. The morning of September 19th began with a thick, persistent fog blanketing the rolling terrain around Aracourt, reducing visibility to mere dozens of yards. German reconnaissance was practically non-existent. The new Panzer brigades, lacking proper scouting units, advanced blindly into terrain held by American forces who knew the ground intimately and had established well-prepared defensive positions. At approximately 8:00 a.m., lead elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade penetrated American outposts east and south of Aracourt. The German tanks, factory, new Panthers with green crews, moved forward in clumsy column formations, a critical tactical error that veteran American tankers immediately knew how to exploit. Captain Kenneth R. Lameson's C Company, 37th Tank Battalion, held key positions along the approaches to Aracourt. His Sherman crews had been urgently briefed on the HVAP rounds in their ammunition racks. 6 rounds per tank. Use them wisely. The briefing had emphasized against Panther turrets or mantlets at ranges where the velocity is still high enough for a kill. The fog that hindered German movement now became an ally to the American defenders. A section of Lameson's Shermans occupied camouflaged positions south of the village. When the first Panther materialized from the mist, a dark grey ghost that emerged barely 75 meters away. At this range, the Panther's superior long-range gunnery meant nothing. The American gunner, his eye pressed to the telescopic sight, fired instantly. The report of the 76mm gun was sharp and loud, the HVAP round travelling at over 1,000 meters per second. It struck the Panther's gun mantlet with a brilliant spark of white, hot metal. The tungsten carbide core, harder than the cast steel of the mantlet, punched through and detonated the ammunition stored directly beneath the gun breech. The Panther exploded violently, its turret lifting slightly from the hull on a jet of flame and smoke before slumping back down. Two more Panthers emerged from the fog in quick succession. Both were destroyed within seconds, their crews having no time to even identify the threat, let alone effectively return fire in the limited visibility. The remaining German tanks, shocked and confused, turned away. Their crews were rattled by the sudden, violent loss of 3 Panthers to what they had been told were inferior American tanks that could not harm them frontally. Throughout the morning of September 19th, similar, violent engagements erupted across the Aracourt sector. American tanks, using the fog as both concealment and equalizer, engaged the advancing Panthers at point, blank and medium ranges, where their HVAP rounds were most effective. The German tactical deployment proved disastrous. Advancing in column without proper reconnaissance, the Panther crews repeatedly exposed their thinner side armor to American flanking fire from Shermans they never saw coming. Near Aracourt itself, a platoon of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, also equipped with 76mm guns and a handful of HVAP rounds, engaged German armor at murderously close range. The fast-moving, open-topped Hellcats, with their superior speed and powerful guns, proved devastatingly effective in the close-range, fog-shrouded combat, darting from position to deliver killing blows. By noon, as the fog finally began to lift, American forward artillery observers, previously blinded, could now coordinate fire with the defending tank companies. The deep thrum of artillery shells soon filled the air, raining steel and high explosive on German formations. Then came the air support. P-47 Thunderbolt fighter. Bombers of the 405th Fighter Group arrived overhead, diving through gaps in the cloud cover to strike German armor with 5-inch rockets and 50 caliber machine gun fire. The complete picture of American combined arms superiority became starkly clear. While the Panther possessed superior armor and firepower as an individual weapon system, the American forces employed combined arms tactics as standard, ingrained doctrine. The German tanks advanced without adequate artillery support, without any air cover, and without sufficient infantry to clear American defensive positions. American forces coordinated their armor with artillery, air power, infantry, and tank destroyers in an integrated, responsive system that overwhelmed German technical advantages piece by piece. When Panthers encountered these prepared, multi-layered defenses, they were destroyed piecemeal despite their formidable individual capabilities. The HVAP ammunition did not magically make the Sherman tank an equal to the Panther in technical specifications, but warfare is not conducted on a spreadsheet comparing armor thickness and muzzle velocity. Tanks are destroyed by crews who exploit vulnerabilities under the chaotic, terrifying conditions of combat. The Panther's gun mantlet, a necessary component to allow its powerful 75mm gun to elevate and traverse, was now a confirmed weak point. The junction between the turret and hull, the thinner side armor, the engine deck, all represented targets that HVAP equipped Shermans could now engage successfully at combat ranges that previously would have been suicidal. More devastating to German morale than the physical losses was the profound psychological impact of discovering their armor was no longer invulnerable. Panther crews had been trained to believe, absolutely, that their tanks could not be penetrated from the front by American tank fire. Intelligence briefings had emphasized the Sherman's inadequate firepower. Crews were told that as long as they kept their thick, frontal armor toward the enemy, they were safe. The first Panther commanders to watch a Sherman's round punch straight through their mantlet and detonate their ready ammunition learned a different, horrifying truth. The survivors of such encounters carried that knowledge back to their units, spreading an insidious awareness that American tanks now possessed ammunition capable of defeating the Panthers' primary defense. By the afternoon of September 19th, confused and frantic reports were streaming back to German headquarters, claiming that American Shermans possessed new, more powerful guns or secret ammunition. The reports were a jumble of misinformation. Some claimed the Americans had secretly deployed tank destroyers with 90 WWII guns. Others suggested the British had provided 17-pounder Firefly tanks to American units. The truth, that American industry had developed and fielded a specialized ammunition type that partially negated the Panthers' carefully engineered armor advantage, was, in many ways, more troubling to German planners than any of the wilder theories. It was a demonstration that American industrial capacity and technical ingenuity could respond to battlefield problems faster than German industry could develop counters. It signaled a war of attrition they were destined to lose. The fighting raged and sputtered for days, with the major German offensive efforts finally stalling by September 22nd. When the battlefield fell silent, the tally was lopsided. American forces had destroyed or disabled approximately 86 German tanks and assault guns. American losses stood at 25 Sherman tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The kill ratio heavily favored the Americans, despite their profound technical disadvantage in individual tank-to-tank performance. The Battle of Aracourt represented not just a tactical victory, but a psychological watershed. American tank crews learned, through hard-won experience, that they could defeat Panthers without always having to wait for specialized tank destroyers or overwhelming air support. They had a tool, however scarce, that could win a fight. German crews, conversely, lost the psychological security of believing in their tanks' absolute frontal invulnerability. That loss of confidence would subtly, but surely influence their tactics for the remainder of the war. The German perspective on Aracourt was one of stunned confusion and bitter recrimination. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which had entered battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns, could muster fewer than 20 operational vehicles by September 29th. German after-action reports struggled to explain the catastrophic defeat. The technical superiority of the Panther was undeniable on paper. How had these magnificent machines been defeated so comprehensively? The answers lay partly in the stark difference in training and experience. The Panzer Brigade crews had minimal training, often arriving at the front with only weeks of classroom and driving instruction. American tank crews in the 4th Armored Division were hardened veterans who had fought across France, understood the intricate dance of combined arms warfare, and had learned to read the terrain for every possible tactical advantage. But training and tactics alone did not fully explain the Panther losses, particularly the penetrations through frontal armor that should have been impossible with standard American ammunition. German intelligence officers, examining the wrecked hulks of Panthers on the field, found entry holes that were smaller and cleaner than those from standard shells, suggesting a sub-caliber projectile When dud rounds were recovered near disabled tanks, the truth was revealed. The Americans had deployed tungsten, cord ammunition in significant, effective quantities. This discovery had profound strategic implications. Germany itself had developed similar ammunition, the Panzergranate 40, which used a tungsten core to achieve spectacular penetration. But German tungsten supplies were critically limited by late 1944, with priority given to machine tools essential for war production. The realization that the Americans could field specialized tungsten, cord ammunition in quantities sufficient to distribute to frontline tank units, was a chilling demonstration of an industrial capacity and global resource access that Germany could not hope to match. It meant that not only were American tanks more numerous and better supported logistically, but they were now being equipped with ammunition that systematically negated Germany's carefully engineered, hard-won technical advantages in armor protection. The impact of HVAP ammunition extended far beyond the immediate tactical results at Aracourt. As word spread through American armored units that the new Hyper, Shot, or Wolfram rounds could defeat Panthers under the right circumstances, tank crews became more willing to engage German armor directly. The psychological paralysis that had affected some units during the difficult, bloody fighting in Normandy began to dissipate. Crews still respected the Panthers' capabilities. They were not fools, but they no longer felt utterly helpless against it. This shift in morale proved crucial for subsequent operations. A crew that believes it can fight will engage aggressively, seeking advantageous positions and taking calculated risks. A crew that believes it is fundamentally outmatched will hesitate, ceding the initiative to the enemy. HVAP ammunition, though in critically short supply, provided American tankers with a weapon that allowed them to fight Panthers on more nearly equal terms. Even crews that had never fired an HVAP round benefited psychologically from simply knowing the ammunition existed and might be available in a moment of dire need. This scarcity, however, forced commanders to make agonizing prioritization decisions. Tank destroyer battalions, whose very mission was purely anti-tank combat, often received preferential allocation of the precious HVAP rounds. The Sherman tanks, with their dual role of supporting infantry and engaging enemy armor, frequently received fewer rounds, despite often encountering enemy tanks more regularly. This created a constant operational tension between immediate tactical needs and harsh supply realities. The allocation system, managed at multiple command levels from army down to battalion, was inefficient and often arbitrary. Some units received more HVAP than they could immediately use, while others exhausted their meager supply within days of heavy fighting and received no resupply despite desperate, urgent requests. When German forces launched their massive, surprise offensive in the Ardennes in December 1944, American tank units faced renewed and intense pressure. The Battle of the Bulge saw hundreds of Panthers, and the even more fearsome Tiger tanks deployed in winter conditions that favored defensive fighting and limited the Allies' overwhelming air superiority due to persistent poor weather. American Sherman crews once again had to rely heavily on their scarce HVAP ammunition to engage German heavy armor. The shortage became critical within days of the initial attacks. Some units exhausted their entire HVAP supply completely and found their resupply requests going unfulfilled as logistical networks struggled to deliver any kind of ammunition over snow-blocked roads and through areas disrupted by the German advances. Yet, even in this desperate, chaotic fighting, American forces demonstrated repeatedly that tactical skill and combined arms coordination could compensate for technical disadvantage. Tank crews coordinated closely with infantry, using bazooka teams to stalk and disable Panthers from close range while Shermans provided covering fire. Artillery forward observers, masters of their craft, called in devastating, time-on-target missions that could disable a tank's tracks, shatter its optics, or kill exposed crew members, even when the shells could not penetrate the main armor. And when the weather finally broke in late December and January, the return of Allied air power proved utterly devastating to German armor concentrations trapped on snow-covered roads. The Battle of the Bulge ended with German armored forces shattered, having lost hundreds of irreplaceable tanks and experienced crews in a grand offensive that failed to achieve its strategic objectives. By early 1945, the strategic picture had shifted decisively and irreversibly in the Allies' favor. American and British forces were massing to cross the Rhine. Soviet armies were advancing relentlessly from the east, having shattered German defensive lines in massive winter offensives. Germany's industrial capacity was in a state of collapse, hammered by ceaseless strategic bombing, the loss of territory containing critical resources and manufacturing facilities, and severe, crippling shortages of raw materials, most critically fuel, and, yes, tungsten. Panther production, which had reached a peak of 900 units in 1944, fell off a cliff in early 1945 as factories were bombed into rubble. Transportation networks disintegrated, and raw materials became utterly unavailable. Even when Panthers were produced, fuel shortages often kept them immobilized, sitting ducks for advancing Allied forces. German tank units in the final chaotic months frequently abandoned perfectly functional tanks, not because of combat damage, but because they had no gasoline to run them. The technical limitations of HVAP, while less publicized than its dramatic successes, deserve examination for a complete historical picture. The tungsten carbide core, while exceptionally hard and excellent at penetrating armor under ideal conditions, was inherently brittle. Below a certain impact velocity, approximately 300 to 500 feet per second, the core could shatter on contact with the armor rather than cleanly penetrating. This meant that HVAP effectiveness declined significantly at longer ranges where velocity had bled off due to air resistance. The effective range against a Panther's mantlet was, therefore, about 1,000 meters. Beyond this distance, the probability of the core shattering on impact increased substantially. American tankers learned these limitations through brutal combat experience, sometimes at a fatal cost. Crews that fired their precious HVAP at Panthers beyond effective range wasted their scarce ammunition and often provoked accurate, lethal return fire from German guns that remained highly effective at those longer ranges. Training on proper HVAP employment was often minimal or non-existent. The ammunition frequently arrived at frontline units, faster than any training materials or doctrine could be developed and distributed. Many crews learned effective employment techniques through grim trial and error under fire. A documented experience of Sergeant Francis Baker on November 20, 1944, illustrated both the potential and the stark limitations of HVAP in actual combat. His Sherman, equipped with a 76mm gun and carrying a few HVAP rounds, engaged a Panther at approximately 800 yards. Baker's gunner fired at least 7 rounds, with multiple hits observed on the Panther's side armor. To Baker's mounting frustration and fear, the rounds, even the HVAP, bounced off or failed to penetrate. The engagement demonstrated that even the specialized ammunition had significant limits against sloped or angled armor. The Panther, perhaps equally frustrated or damaged in its optics, withdrew from the engagement rather than pressing the attack. So, while the action was not a complete tactical failure, it served as a powerful reminder to Sherman crews that HVAP was not a magic wand. Proper tactics, careful shot placement, accurate range estimation, and achieving advantageous angles of engagement remained absolutely critical factors for survival and success. HVAP gave American tankers significantly better odds, but it did not guarantee victory. That still required skill, courage, and a measure of luck. The post-war analysis of HVAP ammunition would reveal both its successes and its inherent limitations in stark detail. Against the Panther's gun mantlet at ranges up to 1,000 meters, HVAP was highly effective when hits were achieved, reliably penetrating and often causing catastrophic secondary explosions that doomed the tank. Against the heavily sloped glacis plate, however, the results were generally poor, except at very close ranges and near perpendicular angles. The extreme slope meant that the tungsten-cord rounds, even travelling at high velocity, would often ricochet or simply shatter on impact. This confirmed the hard-learned lesson that Sherman crews still needed to manoeuvre for advantageous shot angles, flanking Panthers whenever tactically possible. The ammunition did not make the Sherman tank a technical equal to the Panther, but it gave competent American crews a fighting chance in engagements where previously they had possessed little hope of achieving a frontal kill. It was a tool, not a solution. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, provided another, different combat test of HP's effectiveness. American Sherman tanks, now primarily the improved M4A3E8 variant armed with the 76mm gun, faced Soviet-built T-3 Forsher-85 tanks in North Korean and later Chinese service. Unlike the situation in Europe, where HVAP had been a critically scarce commodity, by 1950 tungsten supplies were no longer constrained by competing wartime demands, and substantial stocks were readily available. American tank crews in Korea found that HVAP rounds easily and reliably penetrated the T-34-85's armor at normal combat ranges. The T-34-85, while a capable and legendary design, possessed armor protection significantly inferior to the Panthers. Its 90mm thick turret front and 45mm thick glacis plate could not resist the tungsten-cord projectiles fired at high velocity from the 76mm guns. American Shermans in Korea achieved remarkably favorable exchange ratios against communist armor, due partly to superior crew training and tactics, but also significantly to the plentiful availability of HVAP ammunition. The vindication of the 76mm Sherman in Korea was a